is respected.
UN Security Council.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching World Report on News 6 World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The US and Ukraine have said that they have drafted a refined peace framework in Geneva to revise an earlier plan criticized as too favorable towards Russia, with both sides committing to intensive work before a Thursday deadline. Meanwhile, the White House has said that the updated plan meets Ukraine's strategic requirements amid ongoing questions about security guarantees for Kyiv, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio led the U.S. delegation amid ongoing questions about security guarantees. Russian forces have staged a massive drone attack on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, killing 4 people and injuring several others. Rescue efforts for people trapped in the rubble are still underway. The Israeli army released a video claiming to show the strike that killed Hezbollah's top military in the southern suburb of Beirut, despite a U.S.-brokered truce a year ago. The strike, the first on the outskirts of the Lebanese capital in months, targeted Iran-backed Hezbollah's acting chief of staff, Ali Tabtabai, the military has said in a statement. French President Emmanuel Macron met with his counterpart Brice Oligui Nguema from Gabon in Libreville. The two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to a reinvented partnership following bilateral talks. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has urged German Chancellor Friedrich Merz to adopt a rational and pragmatic China policy, calling on Berlin to prioritize shared interests during their meeting at the G20 summit in Johannesburg. The talks signal a move to repair strained ties after German Foreign Minister postponed his China visit due to lack of high-level meetings. Indonesia has introduced the Global Citizenship of Indonesia (GCI) permit, allowing former Indonesian citizens to live and work in the country indefinitely as a substitute for dual citizenship, which remains illegal under national law. The policy is modeled after India's OCI program, applies to adults who must otherwise choose a single nationality at 18 years of age. More than 11,000 people in 7 Malaysian states have been affected by flooding caused by torrential rain. A report from the National Disaster Management Agency showed 11,009 people from 3,839 families who have been affected by flooding as of 6 a.m. local time. Now we start with Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the aggressor must pay for the war it started, calling a decision on the use of frozen Russian assets crucial for justice and for Ukraine's survival. He says Kyiv will keep working with global partners on peace proposals, but only on terms that strengthen Ukraine and do not weaken its position on the battlefield or at the negotiating table. Zelensky has also stressed that the principal amounts of Russian state assets held abroad, not just the profits, should be directed towards defense, reconstruction, and humanitarian needs. He added that European and G7 decisions in the coming weeks will determine whether Ukraine can secure long-term financial stability as it faces continued Russian strikes and pressure along the front. He has said that Kyiv is ready to discuss compromises, but only those that protect Ukrainian sovereignty and never any that reward aggression or signal fatigue from its partners.
I'm glad that the Ukrainian Crimean platform and its parliamentary track continues to work and keeps attention on a simple truth. Every nation and every state must be respected, and the core principle that kept Europe peaceful longer than at any other time in its history must be protected. These principles are clear: respect for human life, no changing borders by force, and no spheres of influence a polite term used to cover the desire to dominate other nations and wage wars of aggression. This is exactly what the Crimean platform stands for, refusing to accept that launching wars of conquest is normal and refusing to normalize cruelty toward people and nations. Thanks. Thank you for taking this principled position and for clearly stating that the annexation of Crimea in 2014 was illegal.
The Kremlin has said that it considers it to be inappropriate to discuss elements of European counter-proposals on Ukraine, including wording related to NATO through the media. Kremlin officials stressed that negotiations should remain confidential. Moscow has also stated that there are currently no plans for a meeting this week between Russian and U.S. delegations, and noted that it has not received any official information from the Geneva talks on potential Ukraine peace efforts. Separately, the Kremlin has confirmed that a telephone call is scheduled between President Vladimir Putin and the President of Turkey on Monday. Now for this discussion, we welcome Andrea Lucidi. He's a war reporter, joins us live from Lugansk. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. How do you think, how effective can this peace plan be while the war rages on, escalating from both sides? And what do you think, what were the changes made to 28-point U.S. brokered peace plan to cater more towards Ukraine as well?
Well, this plan is obviously a base for future discussion about the possibility to make a deal or have an immediately peace between Russia and Ukraine. But also in the new plan, there are some points that Moscow cannot accept. And from the Kremlin, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, many times in these months, we hear communication about the necessity to discuss about the deep causes of this conflict. And also the position of Europe is completely unclear about this, because it seems to me that they want to follow a parallel way to the peace. They make a parallel peace plan without any consultation with the President Trump or Marco Rubio. And yes, seems that the coalition of the Willinger want to propose to Zelensky another plan, more profitable for him, more in favor of Ukraine, but from my point of view, completely unacceptable from the Russian Federation and completely far from the Russian request. The main request from Russia was that Ukraine need to be a neutral country for the future without any access to the NATO. And in the second plan that I saw from the coalition of the Willinger, this point is broad and very important for them. So Ukraine in NATO, and this is unacceptable for Russia.
And Andrew, what do you think, how effective would be whatever comes out of it? As you know, Russia is whatever U.S. Suggested, it seems like Russia feels like it's not enough catered towards Russia, and Ukraine feels like it's not catered enough towards. So how effective would it be, and what do you think is motivating U.S. to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, the U.S. in this moment, the main task of the President Donald Trump is obviously to stop this war, because I think he wants to focus more attention on other zones in the world, China, Taiwan, and of course it's important for the new foreign policy of the U.S. to broke this relationship between Russia and China. And for this, they are available to give some concession to Russia, like the control of Donbass, like the control of the regions of Kherson and Zaporozhye, that are important for Moscow. But the main thing is that Zelensky is thinking that he can proceed his war without Washington, without the main. Also, Zelensky called the US as our main partner. So this is very important. And I think that the European Union have not the resources for support Zelensky like the US are making now. And if this plan can be a base for future negotiation, we need to accept and we need to be ready to accept that Ukraine need to make some concession to Russia for stop the war. But at this moment, for me, it's completely unclear the position of Europe, because they are supporting the continuation of the war.
Yes. With that, I would like to thank Andrea Lucidi for joining us today as a war reporter from Lugansk, Russia. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Middle East. Israeli Army Chief Eyal Zamir has announced that several senior Israeli army commanders who served before and during the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack will be dismissed from reserve service. Zamir has said that he has fired and also reprimanded several senior commanders over the military's failure to protect the civilians of the State of Israel. The announcement marks one of the most far-reaching accountability actions in IDF's history. It follows what Zamir described as a thorough, professional, and in-depth inquiry into the systematic breakdowns that allowed the devastating assault. The October 7, 2023 attack was carried out by Hamas and other Gaza-based militants and saw coordinated infiltrations by land, air, and sea. Over 1,200 Israelis were killed, most of them being civilians, and approximately 240 hostages were abducted into Gaza. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Sorel Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Now, Sol, do you think this accountability is legitimate and logical for Israel to do, as we know that this is the biggest such action in IDF's history? Sol, you might be muted here.
Hi.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes,
it certainly was legitimate. It was the biggest action of its type in Israel's history, firing and dismissing and removing from reserve so many generals. However, it was by far the biggest failure in the history of the military. And although the war since has turned out in Israel's favor, nevertheless, the failures on that day that took 6-7 hours to get under control, when a country with a huge military budget managed by these generals was unable to retard or prevent the ingress of 3,000 or 4,000 mostly lightly armed terrorists, is astonishing and will need to be investigated for decades to come. The lessons that will be learned from it are almost endless, but removing the generals that were sitting at the top of the IDF at the time seems to be absolutely critical. Whatever they did wrong might not be known yet, but certainly the mentality, the general complacency, their understanding of the field situation, of the strategic situation, and of the malevolent intent of their enemies, their underestimation of that intent is what led to the disaster. It should never have been allowed to happen.
So how do you...
You're absolutely correct. These people should be fired. And in my opinion, there are one or two of them whose incompetence was so great that it reaches the level of criminal negligence, and they should be charged and jailed.
So you're saying that some officers were too relaxed or they weren't attentive towards these?
Absolutely. And we even have information that they published themselves from the IDF spokesman's office in the weeks before, where a number of generals went on a tour of the Gaza border and reassured civilians in the area and also via social media to the entire country that there was nothing to worry about, that Hamas had no intention of attacking Israel. And it would have been one thing if they just told that to the people to calm them down, but it seems quite clear that they absolutely believe that themselves. this was their perspective that they were working on. This is why there were only a few hundred troops in the border area facing what they knew was an army of 35,000 armed men. The level of incompetence and complacency is staggering, absolutely staggering. And the lower you go down the chain of command, to some extent, up to a point. So the people who, for example, were in charge of the Gaza division and the people who were running the Southern Command, who were directly responsible, well, their level of responsibility, in my opinion, is even higher because they really only had one job. Their job was to sit there facing the Gaza border, noticing there are 35,000 enemies on the other side trying to get in, and ensure that they couldn't. And as you go up higher at the chain of command, the distance from the responsibility is slightly further, but at the same time, the buck stops there. So all that entire chain of command, from the local field divisions on the southern border, all the way up to the top of the army at the time, and the intelligence services, and the military intelligence, all of them really have to go. And some of them, in my opinion, need to go to jail.
Right, and so why do you think these people who exactly, like you mentioned, that they only have one job to do, especially being in the border, staying alert, why do you think they underestimated these?
It seems to me, from speaking to people who met all these people, that the kind of man, because it is almost all men, who would stay in the army after their compulsory service and take a career in the army for decades, were not necessarily the best soldiers, the most strategic thinkers, or even the brightest people. They were the people who, for whatever reason, thought this would be a useful career with the opportunity of a very early pension at perhaps 45, at which point they can go into business. This was essentially their plan. And from the other direction, how these people were selected, it was also clear that it was an old boys club, that the people who were allowed to rise to the top of the IDF and intelligence services were not necessarily even the brightest of those careerists, who themselves were not the brightest. They were picked because of their family connections, their historical, almost clan connections within Israeli culture, because of political views that were felt to be congenial to the established culture at the top of the IDF. So it was always replacing itself with a kind of groupthink. Right. And that groupthink, essentially, more than anything, except perhaps the Hamas's own actions, of course, is really what led to the calamity. Because even faced with mounting evidence that Hamas were absolutely planning to do what they did. I mean, Hamas even built a mock-up Israeli village about 3 kilometers from the Israeli border. And the Israeli low-level soldiers are watching Hamas train there, doing kidnapping and murder operations in this mock-up Israeli village. They passed the information up to the chain of command, and yet nothing was done. The levels of incompetence and groupthink are astonishing, and it can only be due to, on the one hand, careerists who were not the best, and them themselves being picked by people right at the top, who themselves, of course, are also careerists from a generation before, who are picking people out of that pool of careerists due to their personal affiliations rather than their competence. And as a result, we have what we have, and all these people have to go.
I hope that will be changed, but thank you very much, Sol, for joining us today and sharing that insight as a political commentator from Tel Aviv. Now we move on to Asia. Hong Kong leader John Lee has said that his government fully backs China's diplomatic stance towards Japan and closely monitors the growing tensions between Beijing and Tokyo. His comments mark the first public response from a Hong Kong official since the dispute escalated more than 2 weeks ago. The spat began after Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi told the parliament that a potential Chinese attack on Taiwan could prompt a military response from Tokyo. Beijing has earlier condemned these remarks and says that they send a wrong signal on Taiwan. John Lee says the comments damage the atmosphere for China-Japan engagement and says Hong Kong will align its actions with national interests. He does not directly confirm that Hong Kong suspends exchanges with Japan, but he says all arrangements will respect national dignity. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, this is, so where exactly does Hong Kong politically align itself, the current government, and what is their stance?
Of course, China is calling the Chinese citizens not to go Japan. And so same thing could apply to the Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government will call the Hong Kong people not to go Japan. So that could happen. But at the same time, this attitude itself proved that the one country, two system, which means that respecting democracy, is not working in China. So China's policy is Hong Kong's policy means that one country, one system, not two systems. So that is the reason this is a matter. Because the Prime Minister Takaichi's explanation about the crisis in Taiwan, just side of Japan, is crisis for Japan, means that this is just honest explanation. Under the democratic rule, this is not provocative, just an honest explanation from leader to the Japanese citizen to promote discussion about Japan's attitude. And this is the responsibility of the leader of the democratic country. So this is not provocative. In the other countries, the same thing could happen in the democratic country. But in China, this is not. In China, there is no democracy. So freedom of speech is not exist. And now China's promise, the Hong Kong could be another system, even in the one country. That was China's promise. But look at Hong Kong now, in this case, of course, Hong Kong has only one system, which is China's system, and following the China's policy. So this means that they are not democratic. And that is the reason the Prime Minister Takaichi's remark is provocative China think, because this is challenging against China, challenging against China's rule, China's dominance in the Northeast Asia, because they are not democratic government. Democracy is not a regime they are respecting. So that's why this is a problem they are thinking, and they try to escalate the pressure to the Prime Minister Takaichi government. But view from democracy, Japan's attitude is not provocative. China's attitude, only China's attitude is provocative.
Yes.
That is the current situation.
Yes, and lastly, if you can briefly tell us why is Hong Kong aligning with China right now, especially now that tensions are rising between Japan and Beijing? What are the risks or benefits for Hong Kong aligning with China?
No, Hong Kong is not free. Hong Kong is just a governor under the Chinese government. Chinese government is central government, and Hong Kong's government just a local government. Governor of the one province of China, something like that. So that's why they are following the China. So Chinese government asks the Hong Kong government try to making the pressure to Japan along with the China's government policy. Do not go to Japan means that which will apply the people in Hong Kong too, because Hong Kong people is Chinese under the one central government, under the one system of China. So that's why the Hong Kong people, as a Chinese, they cannot go Japan under the Chinese government. Hong Kong is not independent. Hong Kong is not independent system under one country. One country, one system is China's way, not one country, the two system China promised in the past. That is a reality view from this Hong Kong's government's remark.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Satoru Nagao for joining us and sharing that insight from Japan. Now we move on to our next news. 3 suicide bombers have attacked the headquarters of Pakistan's paramilitary forces. killing 3 personnel and injuring at least 5 people. The Pakistani police has stated that the attackers opened fire as they forced themselves into the headquarters of the Frontier Constabulary in Peshawar city before blowing themselves up inside the complex. The headquarters of the force is located in a densely populated area of Peshawar, the capital of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Meanwhile, no militant group has claimed responsibility for the attack so far. An eyewitness and the chief of Capitol Police has responded to the attack. Let's just listen into what they have shared.
मैं इस कैंटोनमेंट बोर्ड हॉस्पिटल में ड्यूटी कर रहा हूँ और मैं ड्यूटी के लिए आ रहा था, यूटर्न ले रहा था कि यूटर्न के दौरान ब्लास्ट हो गई, तो बस फिर मुझे पता नहीं चला कि क्या हुआ है क्या नहीं हुआ है।
8:11 पर फेडरल कॉन्स्टेबलरी का जो हेडक्वार्टर है पेशावर सदर में, उसके गेट पर एक खुदकश हमलावर ने खुदकश हमला किया और उसके बाद 2 हमलावर ने एंट्री की है। उस खुदकश हमलावर की वजह से 3 एहलकार मौके पर शहीद हुए। 2 जिन्होंने एंट्री की उनको फौरी तौर पर न्यूट्रलाइज करके और फेडरल कॉन्स्टेबलरी के एहलकारों ने अपनी अलर्टनेस की वजह से बड़े नुकसान से बचा।
Now we move on to Australia. Australian far-right Senator Pauline Hanson has caused a stir in Parliament on November 24 by wearing a burqa as a part of her campaign to ban the Muslim garment in public. Hanson, who has previously worn the burqa in the Parliament in 2017, aimed to highlight her proposed bill to outlaw burqas and other full-face coverings. Her stunt followed the Senate's rejection of her bill. Muslim senators, including Greens Mehreen Faruqi and Independent Fatima Payman, has condemned the act as racist, calling it disgraceful and accusing Hanson of displaying blatant racism. Both Penny Wong, leader of the Labour government in the Senate, and Anne Ruston from the opposition also denounced the action, with Wong calling it not worthy of a senator when Hanson refused to remove the burqa. Senate proceedings were suspended. Let's listen in.
President, a dress code might be a choice of the senators, but racism should not be the choice of the Senate. This is a racist senator displaying blatant racism and Islamophobia, President, and someone should pull her up on that.
Whatever views we may have on policy is to be this disrespectful of the chamber and of people of faith. Whatever our own beliefs may be, the sort of disrespect that you are engaging in now is not worthy of a member of the Australian Senate, and it should not be allowed to stand.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching News 6 World for more news updates from around the world.